So, Olivia, what do we know about what happens after that last Canadian plane leaves?
Adrian, Canada, along with other G7 countries, is planning discussions with the Taliban in the coming days about how to treat those people who want to leave but have been left behind. The government says it's still committed to taking in 20,000 Afghan refugees, but first they need to leave Afghanistan. And last night the Taliban said it doesn't want any Afghans to leave.
All right, so difficult. Olivia, thank you.
Archibald is known for not shying away from criticizing government, changing dynamics ahead of a possible upcoming snap federal election. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News, Ottawa.
Will we begin to see the results of this plan?
Well, Andrew, the government has already started work on some of these promises. For example, it's passed legislation to reform the child welfare system and protect Indigenous languages. But much of the work in the action plan will take longer, and the government is committing to annual progress reports. But for the people who continue to gather here at this memorial for Kamloops, laying shoes, toys, and flowers, that isn't good enough. They want action now. Andrew?
Okay, Olivia Stefanovich, thank you.
A small gesture, heavy with meaning. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh's campaign path led him through rows of small red flags, each representing evidence of possible human remains near the former Maryville Indian Residential School.
It's about Indigenous people being denied justice, being denied dignity.
Singh says his own experience with marginalization drives him to seek accountability.
I know a little bit what that's like, and I promise you I'll be different.
Singh made the announcement today in a Conservative stronghold where the NDP doesn't even have a confirmed candidate yet, indicating today's announcement is more about appealing to the wider Indigenous community, which other federal leaders are trying to court.
What we need to do is continue to be unbelievably ambitious.
Liberal leader Justin Trudeau is promising to advance the work his government started.
It is not an easy journey towards reconciliation we are on, but is one that we are on strongly, firmly, and resolutely.
Mr. Trudeau, I know, cares, but he never acts.
While Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole's pitch focuses on economic development.
Wouldn't it be great if for the first time we could have intergenerational opportunity and wealth transfer, not trauma?
But after so many broken promises, residential school survivors are looking for concrete action.
I take that as like when you hold a feather and you promise something, and you have to live up to your words.
All three leaders have now visited the unmarked graves in Cowessess. Now they have 4 more weeks to prove they will live up to their commitments. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News, Cowessess First Nation. The memorial grows outside Parliament as the maple leaf flies at half-mast in the background.
I am here because I don't know how else to pay my respects.
Inside, a renewed sense of urgency.
What has happened to Indigenous people in this country is genocide.
This is a horrific finding, and our country needs to do more than just lower the flags.
Demands from the opposition for a nationwide search of former residential school sites, an end to court battles with survivors and Indigenous kids in the child welfare system.
The government should call again on the Pope to apologize on behalf of the Catholic Church for their part in this tragedy.
There is obviously more to do.
But the Prime Minister isn't making any specific promises, except survivors will get more support.
We are committed to being there to help Indigenous communities.
6 of the 94 recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission related to missing children and burial grounds. Among them, calls for the government to help find and identify remains.
Some people think, can't you just hire a firm and go and find them all? The communities have been very clear they have to do it in their way.
Ottawa is spending more than $30 million on consultations to answer those calls to action, as well as maintain a student death registry and commemorate.
Some of the core calls to action, which we really stressed, have still not been implemented.
A big one, building a national memorial.
We are losing daily many of the experts to this residential school story, which is the former students themselves, the survivors.
A debate is scheduled for tomorrow evening in the House of Commons as pressure grows on the government to take concrete action. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News, Ottawa.
Colleen Heal Cardinal has lived her life with a name she says doesn't reflect who she is.
Technically, it looks like my family comes from England. So it's completely erased my identity as an Indigenous person and my connection to my kin and my clan and my territory.
Now Ottawa is helping her and other Indigenous people recover their traditional identities.
It's Wechukan, means helper.
Waiving administrative fees for up to 5 years on official documents.
Our names are among the first things we receive. They're individualized, unique. They speak to our past.
The federal government is also appointing an Indigenous Languages Commissioner.
For all too long, our Indigenous languages have been silenced, oppressed, and stigmatized.
Our senators.
And last week, the Senate passed proposed legislation that would change the citizenship oath to recognize treaties with Indigenous peoples.
These are calls to action that could have been completed a long time ago.
The moves bring Ottawa closer to fulfilling the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 recommendations, but there are still dozens incomplete.
Crown Indigenous Relations has constantly said that they're making progress, but we're not seeing that on the ground.
The NDP is demanding the government urgently address the TRC's child welfare recommendations and drop its litigation against a human rights tribunal order requiring Ottawa compensate First Nations children for harm suffered in foster care.
So on the day that they are in court against Indigenous kids, I think it just stinks of hypocrisy.
For this 60s Scoop survivor,
because I would have grown up as Anne-Marie Thrasher had I not been taken away.
Regaining traditional identity brings her one step closer to reconnecting with her mother, who suffered through residential school.
One part of the bond that would be healed again.
A healing that begins with a name reclaimed. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News, Ottawa.
I heard all the time the voice of Joyce to say, come to take me half at the hospital. All the time it's like that in my head, in my heart.
Alice Echequan can't shake the voice of her cousin Joyce, recorded during her final moments in a Quebec hospital last month. The disturbing video captured healthcare workers insulting her and swearing at her.
It's enough the discrimination. It's enough the racism.
It's a message Joyce's loved ones took to Ottawa. Minister Miller, I beg you to help me. I beg you, Madame Bennett, to help me. One of Joyce's 7 children and a family friend took to their knees, pleading with federal ministers during a meeting on Parliament Hill last week. I don't want to wait 1 year, her family friend says. I want action. I want action to start tomorrow.
I should have gotten down on one knee and begged them for forgiveness for a system that failed them.
Today, Indigenous Services Minister Mark Miller said he's now calling an urgent meeting with Indigenous leaders to find solutions, noting the inequality faced by Indigenous people has real health consequences.
Why the hell would I go get a flu vaccine if I was going to get treated like garbage?
Some Indigenous people are afraid of going to hospital because of how they might be treated, this chief says.
The system is not at par in terms of what our people would expect.
He says Indigenous communities should take control of their own healthcare system, which primarily falls under provincial jurisdiction.
We need also to have the space to provide healthcare services based on our own realities.
The federal government is working on carving out that space. It's a complicated task, but there's urgency to see change. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News, Ottawa. Pleas for help painted on wooden placards greet visitors as soon as they arrive. This is the second time Chief Chris Muniz has returned to the reserve since water quality issues forced his community to evacuate to Thunder Bay last month. The road in passes the cemetery.
We lost so many young people, even the elders that are here that,
They never had clean water.
Muniz believes his community's high suicide rate stems from the lack of this basic right.
We were born into a world where we can't rise because of the issues that we face.
The water treatment plant was built in the early 1990s, but after only 2 years of operation, a boil water advisory was put into effect. Now, 25 years later, the community is still waiting for clean drinking water.
And this is the water, the bottled water. You see the big difference?
Nearly all of Niskandiga's 300 members left after an oily sheen was detected in the reservoir. Only a few band members remain to keep the homes warm as Canadian Rangers deliver wood and feed the 80 dogs left behind by families now 450 kilometers south. 23-year-old Charla Muniz washes her hands at a hotel without worrying about breaking out into a rash like she does back home.
Here, then there would be like blisters on like parts of the fingers.
Muniz met Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in 2016 to advocate for clean water. She says she left the meeting hopeful that she'd soon be able to drink water from the tap.
Coming out here and seeing how everyone else has it, and like, why can't we have that?
Now, the worry is they will be stuck here for much longer, possibly until the new year.
They may look normal on the outside, but on the inside, where it hurts, you can't see it. You could feel it.
As the holiday season approaches, they're only asking for one gift: to be home with clean water for the first time this century. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News, Thunder Bay, Ontario. Inside this church in the heart of Montreal's Little Italy lies the story of one man caught up in a historical wrong the federal government wants to make right.
Look at the expressions or the individuals. See, that's one of his strengths over here.
Roger Bocchini Ninkari is the step-grandson of the building's architect, Guido Ninkari, a celebrated artist in his day, but eventually vilified for this, a fresco he created in the 1930s that included fascist Italian dictator Benito Mussolini.
When Guido saw that they wanted to put Mussolini in it, he completely said no. The wardens, let's say, push me, look, if you don't do it, we'll tear up the contract.
He wouldn't get paid.
Yeah, that's it, you had it, okay? So he was forced to do it.
Back in 1940, authorities considered the painting proof that Ninkari was a fascist. Italy had just joined the Second World War on the side of Nazi Germany, and Ottawa declared 31,000 Italian Canadians enemy aliens. Ninkari was among 600 detained, suspected of being traitors.
I look at the record at the end and see no convictions.
Now the federal government is trying to make amends with a formal apology for the treatment of Italian Canadians back then, a gesture championed by this cabinet minister.
I look at it from the perspective of a Minister of Justice, and I, as the first Italian Canadian Minister of Justice, and I'm proud and a bit overwhelmed emotionally.
But this historian is worried Ottawa is rewriting history.
They were interned because the government had some evidence. Now, how serious this evidence was is an issue to be determined, but had evidence that these people had links with the Italian fascist party.
When I look at it, there's so much symbolism, especially
in Ninkari's case, original sketches of the fresco without Mussolini led to his release, but the impact was long-lasting.
He lost a lot of money, and also not only money, but also to his reputation. Oh, you're a fascist, and he was not a fascist whatsoever.
Now, 81 years later, Ottawa's apology is public redemption for Ninkari, and finally closure for his family. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News, Ottawa.